All right, so let's talk about one of the most amazing case studies of all time. Uber. Now, there we go. Now, how much would you have paid for this lovely, iconic medallion? About $1 million, okay? A couple of commas, right? $1 million. Was this a good investment in the world of investments? How good of an investment was this? Before Uber showed up.
Yes, pretty good.
It was insanely good. Let me show you how good this investment was. Okay? Now I don't know why the screen is so hard to read in here, but let me explain this to you, okay? So, the corporate taxi medallion price, okay? Adjusted for inflation, in 1970 it was basically free, and it went up to $1 million. Now here is the Standard & Poor's 500 equity index. Between 1970 and 2010, okay, it's gone up 1,000%. A taxi medallion has gone up 7,000%. Not a bad investment, huh? And you thought that stock traders were sexy, huh? The taxi drivers that are the masters of the universe. Okay? 7,000%. Okay? Now, here's another way. Performance of taxi medallions versus two other more tangible assets. Gold and housing. Okay? Gold went up about 200%. Housing went up about 216%. Okay? And this went up, and relatively speaking, 5x to 6x. So, to be a taxi medallion owner in New York was a license to print money. Okay? They thought that they had secured their futures forever and always. They were sitting pretty. Okay? And, you know, here it is against the index in the most recent times. Okay? The S&P index has gone down. Taxi medallions have gone up. Okay? Now, I promise you, that ain't the way it is today. The world is very different. It's very different because of one guy. Okay? Let's take a look at this guy. So Travis is a street fighter, okay? Hollywood, if the best Hollywood casting agent in the world could not have done a better job of finding the CEO for Uber than they did, okay? This guy is perfect, okay? He's the only guy that can sleep peacefully at night when he's being sued in 100 cities around him. He sleeps like a baby, okay? And I gotta tell you, I don't think I know anybody that could deal with the pressure, the stress, the insanity of this guy's lifestyle. Okay? So, you know Machiavelli's law, right? The old guard is gonna resist you. Well, there's no industry that has been putting up a broader, stronger fight than the taxi industry. Okay? Why? Because they made a lot of investment in these medallions, and they bought monopolies, and then this guy came, he's spoiling the party. If you go find out today what's happened in the city of San Francisco, the value of a taxi medallion in San Francisco has lost 35% of its value in the last 3 years. Same in New York City. Okay? Wow. So if you got into the party late and you paid $1 million for a medallion, your medallion is now worth $650,000. Not cool. Okay? And this guy is the lightning rod for them. Okay? And he revels in it. Okay? He loves this shit, all right? And that's what makes this so fascinating. So when you think about what we've seen with Uber, it's a remarkable case study in just brash, absolute fearless disruption, okay? Because unlike Airbnb, who has also done an extraordinary job, Airbnb has approached this in a far more collegial way. Airbnb will work directly with the regulators in the cities that they go into, and they will say, if you feel like we need to be taxed, we're happy to pay taxes. If you feel that we need to have regulations imposed on us, we are happy to have those regulations imposed on us. Uber has taken the Catholic approach. They go to confession and they beg forgiveness, okay? They do not, in any way, shape, or form, ask for permission. They get on their knees and they say 10 Hail Marys, okay? And so this is a unique approach. And nobody could have predicted how quickly this company expanded, right? It's only been around for about 5 years. They've raised $10 billion in capital. They are valued at $50 billion. $50 billion, okay? And they are in 300 cities around the world, and they're adding 30,000 drivers a month, okay? Now, is there any Nobel Prize that should be given to these guys? I mean, they're in the frickin' taxi industry, right? What are they doing, right? Is there anything that unique? No, but this is the point, right? So what they've done is they've seen customer pain, okay? They've seen customer pain. And let me just get down here to this, right? So this is, you know, the taxi experience. You're standing on a corner, and I don't know how many people, I grew up in New York City, so I know this neighborhood fairly well. You know, it's just such a pain in the ass, and San Francisco's just as bad, okay? You can't ever get a taxi when you need one if it's raining, if it's snowing, if it's the change of shift, if it's the holidays, right? And you have no idea how to plan your time. Am I going to find a taxi in 5 minutes, or is it going to take me 20 minutes, right? And the beauty of Uber is that you know exactly where they're going to come and when, okay? Now, the average taxi is an old, beat-up automobile. It's poorly maintained, and quite frankly, this is a very serious issue. I mean, I know it's kind of funny to see this, but the Taxi Association likes to talk about the fact that Uber is far more dangerous, but of course the statistics do not support that, right? Why? The Uber driver is driving their own car, so they're far more motivated. They're not looking all over to find their next ride. They know exactly where their next ride will be, right? The cars that are owned by these medallion owners are not being maintained, they're not being cleaned. And these poor taxi drivers, I have a lot of empathy for them because they typically work 12 hours a day, right? They're exhausted. And when you're driving and you're exhausted, you're not going to be safe. So there's a lot of traffic accidents in taxis. I've been in a couple of taxis that have been in traffic accidents. Thank God, nothing serious. So there's this fallacy that, you know, the Taxi Association, we're much safer than Uber because we're professional drivers, and Uber is just a bunch of hacks. Well, that's not the case, right? So this is an industry that was ripe for disruption, right? It really is one of those industries where there's a high, high level of dissatisfaction, if not downright discomfort. And for women, right, often even more than that, because a lot of women hated getting into a taxi late at night, right? So there's no doubt that there was an opportunity. So at the time of the case, right, Uber was going into Washington, D.C. And as you can imagine, Washington, D.C., with all of the different transient business activity there, is a huge taxi and limo market, right? So there was a lot at stake when Uber started working with the Taxi Commission and the municipal government in Washington, D.C., right? And so what's the real essence of the case, right? We're not going to spend a lot of time on the case, but what was at stake for Uber in that Washington, D.C. market entry period? What was at stake? What would you say, Joseph?
They were jeopardizing the new product that they want to release,
Okay.
cheaper fares.
Right. Exactly. So say more. Can you say more about what you mean by that? They were, so who was they? You're saying they. Who was the they?
Uber. Uber was trying to provide service, like low budget service.
So they were looking for an Uber X-like experience, and what were they facing in that moment?
Well, actually, the government was trying to increase the fares.
the government was trying to provide sort of a ceiling, if you will, right, on
The price.
pricing. They're trying to lock them in, right? And so what would have happened if they had agreed to that? What would that have done? It would have set a legal precedent that would have been used against them in city after city after city, okay? Well, Washington DC said, and you agreed, that, you can't compete in the low end of the marketplace, okay, please.
That's also what was at stake. I mean, if Washington DC, if Uber was liable in Washington DC under their own rules,
Yeah.
it would make it very difficult for any other places to refuse their entry.
Well, it would. Now, that hasn't kept a lot of people from keeping them out, of course. You cannot get an Uber car in Seattle, for example. You cannot get an Uber car in Las Vegas, right, today. And maybe never in Las Vegas. Because Las Vegas is the ultimate, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas place. And so it's a big limo market, right? And they are protecting that it's almost like Swiss bank privacy, right? So who else had their hand? Yeah, please.
Uber accepted also the Washington DC regulations that will lose their control over pricing.
Yeah.
And it will prevent them from offering more products with cheaper prices.
Yeah, exactly. So what Uber understood, yeah, please.
I also feel that with this regulation, Uber will be limited to these segments of customers.
Absolutely, so that's exactly it. So if Uber accepted this, okay, Uber would be limited basically to serving sort of the black car market. That's a very limited market. And it's an even more limited market today because in the new global economy, there's a lot less, limo companies have been destroyed since 2007, right? They've laid off, at least half of their drivers. It's a completely different market. So just like Netflix always knew that they were in the video on demand market long before video on demand was a possibility, Uber always knew it was going to be in the mainstream transportation business. They had no question. And the black car service was nothing more than a stalking horse or a Trojan horse to give them validation, okay? So, of course, they started in nowhere else but San Francisco, right? Which is exactly where you would expect a company like this to start. And they were an overnight sensation here, right? It was a no-brainer. I mean, literally within days of their being released, they were being adopted very, very virally. And they rolled out across the US, but what they did from the very beginning is they always knew. They knew they were going to be in for a fight. They knew that there was not, with one or two exceptions, most cities did everything they could to keep them out. And that is because taxi associations, remember, these guys have $1 million to spend on a medallion, they got some capital. And they are basically being licensed to print money. They have a monopoly. So the taxi owners are very cash-rich people, and they're very politically connected people. So not surprisingly, the taxi associations have had a lot of influence on getting mayors elected. And you know what happens when you help fund a mayor getting elected, you're going to call in a favor. So Uber knew from day one that they were going to be in for a street fight every time they went into a new city. And the way that Uber would go into a new city is they would create a startup team. They would literally use lean startup methodology, and they would put a team of 2 or 3 people on the ground, and they would approach a new city like any other startup would. Like, we're in this for the first time, okay? The only real cities that embraced Uber were, one, New York City, and this is an interesting example, right? So Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire founder of Bloomberg Markets, okay, is a tech guy, he's an entrepreneur. And Michael Bloomberg was not a politician. Michael Bloomberg was a visionary and a leader. And he said, listen, on September 11, 2001, everything changed in New York. Okay? And we know that we're losing our global edge in the financial services markets because a lot of financial services companies have left New York. We need to be a tech-forward city. And we cannot be viewed as a tech-forward city if we take innovative companies and tell them they're not welcome in New York City. So what Michael Bloomberg did is exactly what we talked about from the very beginning of the course today. We're going to run a little pilot. We're going to let some of our taxi drivers use Uber technology, and we're going to run them as, against the control group of everybody else. And we're going to see if the taxi drivers that have Uber make more money. Take a guess as how that outcome goes. Of course they made more money. They made a lot more money. So Bloomberg expands the pilot. Okay? So Bloomberg was very, very forward-looking. Okay? Los Angeles actually changed their laws to include a new class of service called the network transportation company. okay? But even the most advanced tech country or city in the world, San Francisco, has been in just an absolute hellfight with Uber, right, for a long, long time. So it's very interesting to see the way that different cities have reacted, but almost always, what Uber always knew is it would have to win the hearts and minds of their passengers, and that their passengers, armed with social media, would be able to carry the day. And that's exactly what happened. So Uber always knew it was a game of attrition. And every additional day they got to deliver passengers to their places, they would have more advocates and they would get their elected officials to roll over. And this has been the Uber strategy. And in the United States of America, it has worked brilliantly. Now we leave the safe shores of the US and we go overseas. And obviously it's a different world, as you know, because you live there, okay? So as I go around the world, I know that I've been told by my Spanish students that Spain has not really embraced Uber, that Spain is using a flywheel-like technology that is supporting the traditional, indigenous, if I will, taxi industry, and Uber has been kept out. Is that an accurate statement, for the most part?
No, it was a couple of days ago when I was leaving from Milan to
Yes.
Kenya. I was reviewing the Uber case.
Yes.
I listened to the news that they said that the Uber country manager for Italy was fired because it reached only 50% of the budget of 2014.
Okay, okay.
And she complained that was not her fault, but was due to the lobbies related to the Italian
Yeah.
taxis.
Yeah.
That was still powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I know, obviously, just because Uber's incredibly aggressive approach works in the US doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna work everywhere else, right? So we all know, yeah, you had your hand up? Yeah, please.
Yeah, in Barcelona,
Yeah,
it's banned. but
it's
they-
banned completely.
Yeah, but they have changed the model. So in Barcelona, they are, Uber is now Uber Fresh.
Uber Fresh.
Yeah.
And help me understand what that means.
So Uber Fresh is like for food delivery.
Oh, they're using it only for food delivery.
Yeah.
We're gonna come back to that, okay? Cool. So Uber is pivoting in Barcelona to become a food delivery company. So the drivers that were driving for it before have transitioned. And any idea how Uber Fresh is doing in Barcelona?
I think it's pretty new.
Okay, so too early to tell? Okay, yeah, please.
When I
Okay,
came
that's
here
okay.
from Dubai a year ago,
Yeah.
Uber just launched their limo service. There was only limo service
Yeah,
from the airport.
okay,
Specifically because the taxi service is owned by the country.
yes,
government,
right.
so,
Owned by the sheikh.
Yeah.
So the only way that you can get anything the sheikh's got, you can't get in there.
Exactly.
Okay, I got it, yeah, his picture's everywhere, isn't it? He's kind of like dear leader over there, isn't he? I just love seeing his photo in every building, right? Yeah, please, Terrence.
According to a cab 2 months back in India,
Okay,
in Bangalore, the tech city,
yes,
according to an Uber cab,
and Uber cab.
an Uber cab.
Okay,
One is he didn't know how to use a GPS.
uh-huh,
He
yeah,
didn't know where to go, and he just got his license 1 week back.
okay, that's ridiculous,
I
right?
stepped out,
Yes, you stepped out of the taxi, yeah,
took an Ola cab.
yes.
Ola.
Oh, LA, Ola is the big player in
They've
India.
taken the model of basically Uber,
Yes.
reinvented it,
Yes.
and it's phenomenally good.
Cool, so let's talk about Ola, thank you, Terrence. So Ola is the homegrown hero in India, okay? Ola is, Ola has invested, has $1 billion invested, right? They've invested $1 billion. Now, Uber is, this is exactly the challenge I had this morning. I had a very new driver, and I kept telling him, please don't follow your GPS. I know the city well enough. I know this is not the way to go, okay? But the guy had no clue, right? And this is the problem when you are, this is that whole on-demand versus employee issue, okay? So when you have an employee like that, right, and you try Uber, you'll never go back. Because your impression is so negative now, right? So what's happening in India, as you know, there was an accusation that an Uber driver raped a woman this past December. Now listen, this happens all over the world, but Uber is a lightning rod, right? I mean, this is sad, but this is the problem that Uber faces. So Uber has done a horrible job. Now, Uber for the first time is changing their model in India, right? What are they doing? They're taking cash. They're taking cash because a lot of Indians are not used to using credit cards. They are also creating this Uber rickshaw service because a lot of people in India use rickshaw. Uber just announced about 5 days ago they're going to invest $1 billion in India over the next 9 months. But if they continue to hire drivers, like the guy that picked you up, it's going to be throwing money in the wind, right? And so Ola, right, what is it that you love about Ola? It just works?
No, actually, they've actually engaged the supply chain that already existed.
I see.
Yeah, so the people, they knew the way around.
I got it. So they're working with experienced drivers. So is it like Flywheel then? Are they just going into the traditional taxi and they're giving them an Uber-like hailing app? Is that it?
No,
Is that more or less it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So they're like Flywheel, if you will. Okay, yeah, please, my friend in the corner, yeah.
The only gap and the business model is that they are the fleet owners.
Yes.
So they have the holistic approach of how the whole logistics and supply chain works for them, and they have the different criteria of taking over the licensed drivers. So I think this makes it more complex for people to use it rather than relying on consumer.
Okay, okay, that's cool, thank you. I'm gonna try not to get a move for a second, I wanna, thanks. Cool, all right, please.
I also wanted to add that they were in this taxi and the fleet business much earlier.
Yeah.
And they had this web booking available.
This is Ola now or Uber?
Ola.
Oh, yes,
So
okay.
it was a good innovation to move in and seeing the competition coming in.
I see, so they actually move pretty quickly.
Yeah, they moved pretty quick.
For a taxi company, it's pretty amazing, right? So tell me about their leadership. Anybody tell me about Ola's leadership? Sounds like they know what they're doing here, right? Which is surprising for a group of people that own a taxi company, right? I mean, that's not what I would have expected. So they were in the delivery business and they seized on this new market opportunity and they've actually done an incredible job of keeping Uber out of their market. Jose, yeah?
Yeah, no, I had a different point.
Okay.
Going back to both the employee system and what we talk about regulatory.
Yeah.
Seeing Uber's future roadmap and how they want to go with Uber 2.0,
Yes.
what they have done with the research center and fee for robotics, etc.
Yeah.
They want to release their own autonomous car.
Yeah,
So
okay.
they don't want to build their own employee or anything.
Yeah.
They want to keep themselves as clean as possible.
Yeah.
But then it goes back to regulation. They can go and fight every single city they go in.
Sure.
Because the regulatory facts they have now are going to be child's play compared with the regulatory issues in the future of the autonomous car.
Yeah, so let's talk, that's great, Jose. So everybody knows what Jose's talking about? So here's a very interesting development, right? As you may or may not know, Google has its own venture capital arm. Google Ventures. Google Ventures put $500 million into Uber. But a part of that deal was that Uber would take delivery of 5,000, they would be the very first commercial customer for the first 5,000 Google autonomous vehicles. Okay? Now, unfortunately or fortunately, Google and Uber ain't friends no more. Okay? And so, several things have happened. One is that Google's purchase of Waze, and my Israeli friends know Waze very well because it's an Israeli company. Waze is being used as an Uber, as a Google pilot in Israel. So for the first time ever, Google will be in the ride-hailing or taxi-hailing space, and they're doing it first and foremost in Israel. And they're using the Waze platform as the starting point, which I think is awesome, okay? I think it's a fascinating experiment. The second thing that happened is that our good friend Travis, being the shark that he is, when he got into a pissing contest with Google, he entered into a strategic relationship with Carnegie Mellon University. And they have one of the world's best research labs for robotics. And within 2 months, he hired away all of their top researchers. He doubled their salaries. And he opened up an office across the street by doubling the salaries. Now this is, you know, I mean, there comes a point when you can't help yourself anymore, okay? And so it's one of those things where he's just so aggressive, he just doesn't even know where to stop, right? So here you are, you got into a fight with Google, you're now working with one of the only other alternatives in the space, and within 2 months you're basically torching that relationship by stealing all of their renowned researchers. Okay? Just insane to me, right? So every strength is a weakness. And it's good to be aggressive until you're just a little bit too aggressive, and then it's like, oh shit, maybe I should have done that, right? You can't take that stuff back, okay? He ain't gonna be working with Carnegie Mellon anytime soon, right? So your point, though, is an interesting point, and we can only speculate whether their ultimate plan is to have robot cars pick us up. But most of us are not ready. I mean, I'll get in a robot car fairly soon, right? That's my life, right? I'll do that. But the average person is a long way away from stepping into an autonomous vehicle. So I don't think Travis could possibly imagine that this is gonna go mainstream for at least 7 years, you know? So he's still got a lot of fighting to do in the real world, in the driver world versus before the driverless world. But it's clearly an important part of their long-term vision. And we're gonna get back to that. We're gonna go back to Google, Uber Fresh and all that stuff, right? So anyway, India. Now China, they have struggled, right? So what's going on in China? Yeah, Mary?
They were banned, and then the police also entered the offices, as far as I read it. So
Okay.
it's not allowed, and the drivers are afraid. When you order them,
Yeah.
they really double check, they call you, double
Yeah.
check if you're a real person or
Yeah.
someone who just catch them. But
Yeah.
they still operate, and
Yeah.
especially for the non-Chinese speaking population, it is so much better than the taxis.
Right.
I'm not even able to get a taxi there.
Were you in Shanghai?
Yeah.
So you actually did use Uber?
Yeah,
And
all the time.
okay, and
It's
we're,
even cheaper.
okay. So China's in there, because China did ban Uber, but you know how Uber reacts when they get banned? They just keep doing it. We're gonna sue you, we're gonna issue an injunction, but they don't really care. They just keep doing it, right? But now there's a big fight, because there's this company, and I don't know if I know how to pronounce their name right, because I'm not very good at Mandarin. But the name of the company is Didi Kaudai, is that how it's pronounced? Didi Kaudu? Okay, see, thanks. Okay? Exactly as she said, okay? But this company is part of the Chinese establishment, right? Because Alibaba is an investor, and this company called Tencent is an investor, right? Not 50 cents, but 10 cents, right? Not 50. And so they have raised a lot of money, and they've been able to dominate the Chinese market. But Uber has raised money from Baidu. They've raised over $500 million from Baidu, which is sort of the Google of China. But Uber is now talking about creating an Uber China subsidiary, where they're going to staff it with local people. They're going to use local investment, because they want to take the U.S. aura off of it. They figure the only way that the Chinese will allow them to operate freely is if they make this a very Chinese company. So it's very likely, because Uber does not want to give up China. Okay? So they're likely to start to announce very soon that they're going to put a lot of money through a Chinese subsidiary to tackle China. But they have a big fight on their hands, right? Yeah, how about, what were you going to say, Lynn?
In Brazil,
Yeah.
they launched Uber Bike.
Oh, the bike, okay.
Yeah, they have.
Bicycle sharing?
No, it's in the Uber you have the rack for the bike.
Ah,
So
okay.
if you go
Oh.
biking for your work and then come back, it's raining.
So they'll pick you up.
Pick you up. Yeah.
Okay, and how much will they charge you for that? Just normal ride?
The black ride.
The black ride,
Yeah.
it's a black ride. Okay,
And I
interesting.
don't understand why they don't try it here, because here's like a
Yeah.
big bike. scene.
Yeah, I hear you, but it doesn't rain as much here.
Yeah.
That might be part of it. That's right, okay. Yeah, what would you say, Patrick?
Well, I was gonna say, in Australia, it's actually had a positive effect,
Yeah.
in the sense that they've disrupted the market.
Yeah,
And in Australia, they have goods and services tax, where
Yeah, yeah.
anyone who's a
Yeah.
cab driver is forced to declare their income. So
absolutely.
there's a discussion at the moment whether Uber drivers, are they taxi drivers?
Yeah.
And it's actually forcing a whole reform
Yeah.
of tax legislation to Australia.
Yeah, so here's an article in yesterday's Financial Times, sir. And it's exactly as you said. So here's the article. Uber fights Australia's sales tax ruling. Uber is taking legal action against a ruling by the Australian Taxation Office aimed at forcing it to levy a sales tax on customer fares. Uber feels they have been uniquely and unjustly singled out by the Australian Taxation Office for different tax treatment than truck drivers, bike messengers, Airbnb hosts, or any other participant of the sharing economy. Uber is fighting similar regulatory battles in jurisdictions around the world as it expands at breakneck speed, disrupting the taxi industry in the process. In the federal court challenge in Australia, Uber argues its drivers should not be subject to this GST unless they generate income of at least 75,000 Australian dollars, the equivalent of 55,000 USD, because they provide ride-sharing services other and not taxi services. And they're basically saying that for everybody else, they're held to a different standard.
Yeah, so
right?
the background behind it is that,
Yeah.
that taxi drivers traditionally have been a cash business.
Yes,
So
right.
the government makes them declare everything because
Yeah, yeah.
they're worried about them not declaring income.
Right.
But with Uber,
Yeah.
well, it's all transactions.
It's all
So
transaction. You can't hide the income.
Uber's argument is actually a very valid one.
Yeah.
So it's forcing.
Right, but it does show you that they've become such a lightning rod,
Yeah.
that, you know, they are being held to a different standard because of the take no prisoners approach, right? So they've pissed a lot of people off, and people are trying to, you know, get a piece of them back, right? And that goes with the territory, right? Yeah, please. Levan?
In Russia, for example, at the moment when Uber became popular,
Yes.
the Russian government introduced a new law
Yes.
that forbids the private persons to
Okay.
sell transportation services. No, only
Okay.
companies
Okay.
can do that.
Yeah,
But it still operates.
yeah. So Alice has lived in Russia,
Yeah.
right? And you tell me that you like Uber because, you know, you're a global citizen and you travel all over the world, and so you're used to Uber because you use it here and you use it in other cities, right?
Yeah, I do, and
Yeah.
in Russia it was 2 times less expensive than.
Yeah.
It's a lot less expensive as well.
The ruble collapsed.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a lot less expensive. So anybody else from Russia in the classroom? Do you use Uber?
Not in Russia.
Not in Russia. Why not in Russia?
Because we have a lot of strong local players. We have, so Google is actually very, very weak. For example, we have a local search engine which
Yeah.
is 75% of the market.
Yeah.
And they have, like in China, they have their own aggregator of taxi.
Yeah.
And it's like the biggest player, millions of cars on the road. And talking about Uber model, Get,
Yeah, Get Taxi.
it was trying to penetrate Russian market, and they just almost.
And Get was an Israeli company, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was they tried to beat kind of
Yeah.
Yandex Taxi, but they
Yeah.
decided to.
Yeah, it's not. Well, I mean, you understand, this is a game of giants now, right? It's a game of giants. Yeah, please.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
even if maybe there are some cheaper options for taxis in Russia, I would
Yeah.
still use Uber just because they have the app. And
Yeah.
Right. And it's just easier, right? And you know the quality of service. There's a certain consistency of service that you're gonna get, absolutely. Robulo, and then I'll come to you, okay? Yeah.
Just about Russia. In Russia, it was difficult when I was there. I just raised my hand, and any big person in the street
Yeah,
will
but-
stop and negotiate with you.
Yeah, but it's more
Yeah, that's
expensive to do this than
Oh, yeah.
to do Uber.
Yeah, Uber is cheap, it's way cheap.
Uber is super cheap, it's like.
So what is it, like half the price, or?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
$2 in Shanghai.
Wow.
It's like $2.
Okay, yeah, please.
I think one of the problems with Uber is that
Yeah.
they didn't really understand the culture and how.
In Ecuador, or Ecuador, or?
There is not in Ecuador, but for example in Bogota,
Yeah.
they have problems with taxi drivers and the culture, where companies like Easy Taxi, which is actually the most downloaded app in the world.
In the world?
In the world.
Really?
Yeah, they have more than 420 million.
Easy Taxi?
Yeah, that's Brazilian actually.
Brazilian.
What they did is like they didn't fight against the taxi drivers, they actually put the taxi drivers on their service.
Yeah, yeah, so it's just like Sidecar.
Yeah,
For
exactly.
example.
And,
Yeah.
and that worked awesome, like where like getting a taxi in cities like Quito is
Yeah, yeah.
impossible.
Yeah, yeah, oh, yeah.
And that worked better than Uber.
And why is it impossible in a place like Quito?
In Quito, in Bogota, happened like that Uber drivers were harassed by taxi drivers. They were actually the taxi driver will stop someone that was picking up the Uber driver and break the windshields or punch the guy or something like that. It happened like, it's cultural, and you know like we're police is not like
Yeah, police aren't
coming.
Yeah, and now
Well done.
Okay, so the police are just like the other ones. Yeah. Cool. Don't invite me back to Colombia. All right, please. Is it the right time? It's too late, they've already started over there.
Yeah.
There are 300 cities around the world. Yeah.
That's correct, but a lot of bad aspects is happening outside and maybe the social media.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, so listen, for better or worse, Uber is as ambitious as any company you'll ever think about in your lives, okay? They now are valued at $50 billion, okay? That is an insane valuation by any standard. Uber is priced where they have to execute perfectly, and no company ever executes perfectly. So we go back to my friend from Barcelona who talks about Uber Fresh, right? Uber is not valued at $50 billion because people think that it's earned that valuation as a taxi service. Uber has been talking about building what they call a digital mesh, the Uber Everywhere strategy. The Uber Everywhere strategy is that we will deliver food, we will perform courier services, we will pick up your bicycle. You know, Uber runs these special events, like they had Uber Boat in Boston or in Baltimore, where you could actually rent a boat on demand. They've had Uber Helicopter, okay? So Uber's being considered as something far more than a taxi service. The problem is that as they run all of these little pilots like Uber Fresh, none of them seem to be going very well. And exactly to your point, okay, exactly to your point, a lot of it is because Uber has developed such a reputation for brashness that a lot of other companies are not partnering with Uber because they need partners in the grocery delivery business the way that Peapod needed a partner, right? And so what's happening is when you do what you do at Carnegie Mellon and you go and you screw this prestigious institution and you hire away their best employees at double the salary, what do you think every other strategic partner thinks? Well, they're going to come in and they're going to screw me. So the problem is that they've created a perception that they're not to be trusted. And so as they try to expand beyond their core business, people are not giving them the benefit of the doubt, right? Please, David?
I heard the story that when Lyft launched,
Yeah.
the CEO made all their employees book a Lyft,
an Uber?
in Uber,
Yeah.
they booked a Lyft ride, and
Yeah.
they canceled it to boycott the launch of,
Yeah.
when Lyft launched it.
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, Uber has done all kinds of extremely, what you would consider to be inappropriate things. They will try to jam up lifts, you know, at rush hour. They play dirty, right? They play very dirty.
How is that sustainable, and how is the
I
long run going?
I don't think it is. That's my point, right? It's exactly the question that Dolly just asked is exactly the point. Just like it's not sustainable to take late fees from your customers, it's not sustainable to have a culture where you play dirty all the time, right? It's just not. Yes, say?
Yeah, in Japan, Uber doing, more mature approach still.
More what now?
More mature.
Mature, okay.
approach, yeah.
Yeah.
They are making a strategic partnership with the key taxi cab company.
Okay.
And they only provided, black taxi.
Right.
Yeah, and
Okay.
they limited service in downtown Tokyo.
Okay, right. And are they is there a very powerful black limo service there? So did the government broker that deal? Because the government's involved in everything in Japan, right?
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
actual regulation, very strictly controlled.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the challenges.
Right,
But-
so, yeah,
Yes.
please,
Yeah,
yeah.
interestingly, responding to the Uber entry to the market.
Yes.
So one of the major company called Line.
Yes, Line, yes.
Yeah, platform, like
Yeah.
WhatsApp.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that. The company started same services,
Right.
Line Taxi.
Line taxi.
Yeah, that's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, easy
Right.
to call the taxi, and that's exactly the same leading company.
Yes.
Nihon Kotsu. So
Right. And
everybody
Line
can do
is
that.
it's a South Korean company, but it's also a chat app that's very popular in Japan as well, right?
Yeah, right.
And they also started a music streaming service recently, right?
And
So they're
also-
being very, very aggressive.
Yeah. Another company called Rakuten, like an Amazon in Japan. So
Okay.
they invested in Lyft.
Right,
in the US.
so for whatever
Thinking about
reason, the
services.
people that Uber landed on the ground in Japan took a far more collegial, collaborative, respectful approach than they have elsewhere. How long has Uber been in the Japanese market?
Just a couple of years.
A couple of years, okay. But it's odd to see that they would be so respectful in Japan and so disrespectful in other countries, right?
Yeah.
Fascinating,
Same
yeah.
thing goes on in Hong Kong also.
Yeah.
They collaborate directly with the Uber, with the taxi service.
Okay.
So all the normal Uber taxis are actually taxi services from.
Right, you got it.
Yeah.
Andre? And then I'll come to you, okay? Yeah.
For me, it's interesting that they actually now try to disrupt as well in the packaging industry in
Yeah,
general.
right.
Go versus DHL, UPS,
Yeah, right.
FedEx, that they actually say this last mile problem,
Yeah.
they can actually solve it. Whereas,
Yeah.
like, for example, Amazon comes up with drone delivery, they
Yeah, yeah.
say we can even do the same
Yeah, yeah.
with our infrastructure that we already rolled out.
See, I think it's arrogance, okay? I mean, you think about the people that deliver UPS packages to your home or your apartment. These people are very well paid employees of these companies, right? And they know those neighborhoods. They could drive those neighborhoods in their sleep, right? Literally, because those guys have been driving those roads for years. You're going to take some young kid who, as you know, as Terrence had talked about, you know, has started driving for Uber a couple of weeks or a couple of months ago. There's no way you can compete, right? So there's a level, their success has gone to their head. So they've done a brilliant job in the North American taxi market. But once you go beyond that, you can really start to question how they've gotten to the valuation they have. But I think it's lunacy for them to think that they can compete with DHL. Now, there's going to be a lot of disruption, right? Because you saw that Amazon launched their own app. Amazon is going to let people deliver their packages, right? They're going to basically use a TaskRabbit approach. Because Amazon is trying to cut out DHL and UPS to some extent because it's expensive, right? And they're bearing the cost of that, so they want to drive the cost down. So more and more you're going to have, you know, citizens like you guys delivering Amazon packages to your house. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of disruption. But I don't think Uber has the approach, unless they create an Uber logistics company and they hire these people as employees and they train them. It's hard to imagine how they can compete with specialists, right? Yeah, please.
Sorry,
I'll come back to you, yes, next.
Yeah, when coming back to the Uber valuation, right, companies like Flywheel, which basically act like a facilitator between the licensed cab drivers, right?
Yeah.
So basically, Flywheel, I mean, companies like Flywheel are getting valuation at like hundreds of billions of dollars and raising funds like anything, right? So how would these kind of, you know, disrupt the Uber business model which is currently there? Because they already have the license driver, the safety remains the same, and the surety among the roads remains the same. So how would, you know, company like Flywheel can disrupt Uber model? I mean, it's very easy for them.
Yeah.
Because their unique value proposition will include no such prices. They have a fair kind of thing.
I mean, the challenge, so Flywheel has a brilliant approach. The problem is they're targeting an extremely unsophisticated industry, right? Because Flywheel is going after the taxi operators, right? And so the taxi operators can't help themselves. They just suck, right? And so even if you give them really great apps, you still have the same taxi driver.
But I mean, your experience with like Uber driver, I mean, the same problem would be there with the licensed cab driver because he will run the road. And the same goes in India, I mean, the black cab driver, that's far as my knowledge is concerned. You need to get exams and you know what, just 10 years on the streets, right?
Yeah, of course. Oh, yeah, just like in London, right? The black cars, I mean, 4 years of apprenticeship. Amazing.
And then Uber comes in using the GPS technology to find it out.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's an opportunity for a sidecar or a flywheel or something like that. Now, it's already been done, right? So what we're hearing from a lot of people is, you know, there's the local version. And the question is it too late for these Switzerland kind of companies to now come in? I think they've missed their opportunity.
But I'm still getting 80% of the market share in San Francisco.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know. They are, but the question, San Francisco is a very unique market, right? You go to so I don't know if you know this, right? But how many of you have spent time in the Midwestern United States? It's a different country. Okay? They may use U.S. currency and they may speak English, but that's about as good as it gets, okay? So when you talk to people in the Midwest, do you think they use Uber? No fucking way. Okay? They don't use Uber. So the challenge is, man, is that there's only so many cities that are digitally savvy enough to use Uber. So even though we have 350 million people in this country, you know, most of the sophistication exists on the coasts. And so there's a big swath of land in the middle of the country where, you know, no one's going to use Uber, as amazing as that may sound. So Uber is largely a city-centric app. So yes, you can do really well in San Francisco, but the question is, what are you going to do in Peoria, Illinois? And that's where the challenge is. I promised Itzik I was going to... I'm sorry, my friend.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
I want to say about Israel that Uber couldn't operate there as well. Now they're trying to compete with Get Taxi.
Yes.
And they're only driving licensed taxi.
Okay. So Get Taxi uses licensed taxi drivers?
Yes. And Uber is trying to compete with the same.
Okay. So is Uber working with licensed taxis as well? So they have had no choice? Is that right? And so let me ask my Israeli, so you're from Israel as well. So how, all of my Israeli students, do you think that the ways Google offer is going to be a successful offer in Israel?
So what we heard is that, from what we read, it's not even competing the same kind of ride.
Okay.
Because Google wants to do with only shared ride for work. Like people that
I
work
see.
somewhere.
All right.
So they can see on the ways.
I got it. So it's more of a classic ride share than it is a
Google
taxi.
said they're gonna confirm by the email address that they really work in that area. So
I
it's
see.
very limited.
All right, so they're being extremely focused.
And it's only for Android.
And it's only for, so they're being very, very lean startup
Because
right
of
now.
the regulations.
Okay, so that makes sense though, right? Very interesting, because that wasn't in the Wall Street Journal. They didn't give that level of detail.
Yeah.
They want to tell the story of the two titans going at it, right? So they just said they're going to compete.
But we were a few
Yeah.
months ago in Israel, and we asked some people if they use Uber, if they know about it, and most
Yeah.
of the people, it's not really.
It's just not,
going
it hasn't
like
gotten
that.
any kind
No.
of visibility there, because it's been outlawed and they haven't gotten any traction. Which is amazing, because Israel is such a sophisticated venture capital system.
It will take some years
Yeah.
for them to open it with the regulations. The regulations are hard.
Okay. And Get Taxi, though, tried to be very much a player in Europe. They really haven't been very successful, right? They've kind of retreated back to Israel.
But they're
haven't
working
they?
in New York.
New York.
Very good.
What's that? Yeah, but they have a very, very small percentage. I mean, a very small percentage of the market. Yeah, Yasser, and then I'll come to you, okay? Yeah.
I just have a question about innovation.
Yeah. Yes.
Annual turnover for the company is 10 million.
The annual turnover for Uber is about $2 billion. 2 billion.
They are paying a high percentage of this revenue to the taxi driver, so the remaining amount is much less.
That's exactly right.
So when the market sees 50 billion, the company is like 30 multiples.
Exactly. Yeah.
That means they are buying this idea for the future.
Oh, of course, that's why I'm talking about Uber mesh strategy.
So who said that this idea will not be disruptive in years?
No one said that. Nobody said that. Their investors, you said that. Their investors are betting that this crazy son of a bitch named Travis is going to figure this out. Okay? That's pretty much the game, right? This is a high stakes game. And right now, the investors feel very smart because they put a little bit of money into Uber and it's worth $50 billion. And on paper, they've made a lot of money.
So where is the value for?
The value is the speculation, right? How does any business get value? On discounted cash flow 5 years into the future. So the discounted cash flow projections 5 years into the future assume that the digital mesh strategy is going to work and that they're going to be delivering anything you ever imagined to your customers. Okay? And at the same time, they're going to be able to penetrate China and India and all these massive markets, Germany and France and, you know, parts of Africa. Now, there's nothing I've seen that indicates that's going to happen. So I don't own a crystal ball, but I'll make a prediction. We come back here 2 years from now, their valuation will not be $50 billion. It will not be north. It will be south of $50 billion. They're fighting on too many fronts at once. They have overextended their supply lines. Okay? You can be too ambitious. They are too ambitious. Okay? Period. Okay? Yes, please.
There are many cities that there are no tech.
Yes.
Like they won't use Uber, but there are many cities that they don't need the transportation. For example, Chattanooga, they have both a transportation, but everyone owns a car.
Sure, exactly.
So,
Yeah, right.
like, they don't feel the need to have.
They don't, but I mean, but a lot of people today are saying, you know what, I live in a certain area, I don't need a car anymore because I can use Uber, because I use my car so infrequently that I can use Uber. So Uber is, or the Uber idea is changing the way that we travel. Okay? And theoretically, it could change the way people travel in Chattanooga if they wanted to. Okay? But you're right, but people don't think about that. Chattanooga, when I gotta go to the store, I get in my car and drive. That's not the way people in cities think. It's changing the way the world is operating. And these car sharing services are reducing demand for automobiles, right? Truly are. Yeah, please.
Yeah, what other applications are also doing, for example, Easy Taxi? I know that in Brazil, in cities exactly, they have a partnership with the credit card from Santander.
Okay.
So they get their fee cut in half.
Okay.
So it's cheaper to use both of them.
So you're saying that if you use Santander's credit card, they will actually subsidize the fare by 50%? Wow. That's, and how long is that a limited time offer, or is that a permanent offer?
Oh, it's only at night.
At nighttime, okay. Yeah.
Brazil has a lot of problems about regulations.
Yeah. Right.
So a lot of the taxis, it's not competitive, but there are some kind of system like
Yeah.
that. So in Rio de Janeiro exists, like Uber, there are some kind of subsidies. So we are doing that, but it's not well acceptable. Like everybody thinks that the taxi driver because it's trust.
Right, okay. Now, I mean, let me ask you a question. When you get in a taxi as a single woman in Brazil, do you feel safe? Getting in a taxi in Brazil? No.
No, exactly. We take a cab,
Yeah.
but it's not safe. So normally I'm using like call the company and the company send the
Okay.
phone cab.
All right, so you won't take any taxi on the street? You will take only, yeah, you will only take a taxi once you have called the dispatch and they send a taxi to you.
But normally we need to take us in the streets, but we like wait.
Right, I understand. I know, of course. Yeah, Christopher, then we're gonna wrap this up, okay? We're gonna finish up for the day. Yeah.
Yeah, just going back a little bit to the, the footprint of Uber.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty new to it, so I probably still give it a lot of attention to it as they do it with it. But what I see in London, for example, the price point there is much lower than anything else.
Yes.
The service quality is great.
Yeah.
And
yes,
it compares to what I've read also about a lot of the US cities. So I think, again, if you focus on the product and the attitude of Travis, maybe there might be some short life expectancies for it. But if you look at the consumer side, the behavior that it has created.
In London, right? In London, I agree, right? But I will say, so Terrence's experience is indicative of the challenges they're facing as they expand. I've been using Uber almost from the day it got launched. I was here in San Francisco, and I've been using it forever. And the thing I have seen is their rapid scaling, the quality of their drivers has fallen off the cliff. And half the time someone shows up, and I always say, so how long you been driving? Do you drive for Uber and Lyft? Why just Uber? Why just Lyft? Why not both? Right? I give them the 40 questions, right? And no, because they love it, right? It's fascinating. It's fascinating, and I learn a lot about what's going on. But what I often hear now is, oh, I've been driving for Lyft for 2 weeks, or Uber for 2 weeks, right? And just to Terrence's point, they have no clue. And so what used to be a delight 99% of the time turns out to be a crash. Half the time it's good, half the time it's not so good. Yeah.
Now, if we use, again, looking at the UK,
sure.
For example, the technology they use for taxi dispatching and everything, if you were to use this for ambulance services, for example, if you were to use this for other type of public services that require the same type of services,
sure.
They can basically scale up the market vertically as opposed to going into places where
they certainly theoretically could. There's a lot of other things they could do, right? So remember what we said earlier. Cisco got into trouble when they left their core market. Okay? When they started going into the consumer market, they started failing time after time after time, right? Uber has to understand that their core market, for better or worse, is driving people from point A to point B. And under certain circumstances, but they're trying to do way too much too soon. So before they've even figured out how to expand outside the US, they're getting into 22 other markets, and that's a sure sign of a failure coming. So listen, when Uber works, it's brilliant. When you get a guy that shows up and he shows up exactly when he says he will, and he gives you a bottle of water, and he's respectful, and the car is clean, and you get to where you're going on time, it's awesome. But I've just seen my own experience, it's not happening as often as it did. And that's the problem when you scale at this rate. So I would rather them pull back a little bit and ensure quality in their core market than try to go and take on a whole bunch of new markets, right? And this is the tyranny of a high valuation. Because once you allow yourself to be given this insane valuation, then you have to earn it. And then you start doing unnatural things to keep it. And now you're letting your valuation drive your business versus customer experience. And then everything goes to hell very quickly. Your priorities get turned over. Yeah, please, and I'm gonna wrap it up.
No, just a small question, like
Yeah.
theoretically, like Uber is the biggest startup right now that you can say.
Oh, they're the highest valuation startup in history.
Yeah, so what could happen with an undervaluation? Like if you drop valuation, what would happen to a company that's of the size of Uber?
Well, I mean, this is a momentum world, right? The world of innovation is a momentum world. You're either growing like crazy, right? So if you don't grow at like 100% a quarter, people would say you've lost your stuff, right? That's what's happened to Twitter. That's what's happening to, LinkedIn had a disappointing quarter, right? So what happens is your valuation collapses, okay? And when your valuation collapses, you start to see people that get hired at a certain stock option price are now what they say underwater. And so those people no longer have an incentive to be a part of the team. And they leave, and it begins this vicious cycle of, downward. So down rounds are very demoralizing for a company. And Uber needs swagger. It's part of their corporate culture. They need swagger. They need to win. Uber being hit in a black eye with a huge down round would be a really devastating blow for them, okay, culturally. Okay? All right, Patrick, did you have a...
I was just going to say one thing on your comment. Lyft do really well. I've had Lyft drivers before that are actually part of the customer service team. And they set out that they have to do 10 hours or whatever a week driving, so they know exactly what's going on.
I mean, I would have never thought I would have said this 3 years ago, but I use Lyft far more now than I use Uber. And I use it because, to your point, they know what their business is. Their business is picking up people. The drivers are more relaxed. The drivers are more friendly. It seems like I'm being picked up by a friend. Uber's gotten more corporate, and there's just a different experience, And so this is, at some point. Now, Lyft just raised $150 million from a very prestigious guy named Carl Icahn, who's a huge, corporate raider type investor, right? It's a massive validation. So, it's, the story of the tortoise and the hare? It's a children's fable, okay? This could play out this way. It could play out that the good guys win, which would be a rare outcome, all right? All right, so listen, we're gonna wrap this thing up for the day. So let's talk about what we're gonna do tomorrow. We're gonna spend the morning flipping the coin, and we're gonna spend 3 hours looking at how a large strategic incumbent takes on the ability to stay innovative so that they can remain relevant, okay? And how they will defend to be against disruptive attack. So that will be how we spend the morning. In the afternoon, we're going to look at multi-sided platforms. We're going to look specifically at a handful of cases, but we'll wrap up the day talking about Airbnb, which is another extraordinary example. A company that has grown dramatically, but using a very different approach than Uber. And you'll get an hour to work on your projects at some point tomorrow. Okay? So let's recap what we looked at today, right? So we talked about why are you here with all the choices that you have, right? And there were many great reasons that led you to this classroom, but as I said, one of the key things is that the half-life of a corporation has shrunk, okay? And it's only getting shorter. The most important thing, I think, to take away from this entire discussion today is the Moneyball aspect of what we're looking at, okay? For whatever reason, people invest a disproportionate amount. Almost every dollar in innovation goes to product innovation. And yet it's the most fleeting, the most ephemeral, the most time-limited, and the least sustainable form of innovation there is. Conversely, the least amount of investment goes into business model innovation, and wouldn't you guess that that's the most sustainable? And it returns over 90% of value creation. Okay, so that's why you want to study business model innovation. Okay? So we looked at a number of industries. We looked at the music industry. We've looked at companies like Next Big Sound. We looked at the way that iTunes and iPod used a business model, not a product, to generate a massively successful business that allowed Apple to not just be one of the world's great computer companies, but the world's largest distributor and retailer of music. Right? We looked at, this afternoon, our good friends from Uber. And you can say that Uber has done a brilliant job in North America, and they have done, I would say, an extremely poor job outside of North America. Okay? okay? And especially for an audience like Hult, where almost every one of you comes from a country where Uber has struggled, you know exactly what we're talking about, right? You've seen them struggle on your home turf. And it shows you that any business model is only as good as if it's relevant to the community that you are targeting, okay? It could be a demographic, it could be age-based, but more often than not, it's a cultural or a regional community. And this is a very important lesson, okay? So, great engagement for day one. I hope I didn't give you too much chocolate today, okay? If your dentist has a problem, you can send them my way, all right? We'll see you guys in the morning, 9 o'clock, okay?